Strand Warlock is probably the best Strand build in the entire game, and today I'll quickly show you why. It's not only very easy to use and to set up, it's overall just incredibly consistent and is one of the most versatile builds in all of Destiny, working fantastically for both low-end and high-tier content. Having the ability to infinitely domino effect explosions, both killing and suspending enemies, is something only the Warlock can do, and it is insane. One of the only issues that this build has relative to others is the survivability, which I aim to give you guys a solution for in this video. If you like the video, feel free to drop a like, and make sure to stick around until the end of the video to learn some tips on how to best play with the build. But without further ado, let's just get into it. The whole build starts off with our first aspect, Mind Spun Invocation. This gives all of our grenades enhanced functionality, namely our Shackle Grenade. If we consume our Shackle Grenade, we will gain the Weaver's Trance buff for a total of 25 seconds, where anytime we defeat an enemy, regardless of how we killed them, it will create an explosion from their body, damaging and suspending all enemies nearby. This on its own is very strong, essentially suspending targets for free just by getting kills normally, but where this gets ridiculously strong is if you pair it with an Osteostriga as well as Necrotic Grip. Every single time you land a precision hit with Osteostriga, you will poison that target, but also create a poisoning burst around that target. But if that target happens to die while under the effect of poison, that poison will also spread to all nearby enemies, creating an infinite domino effect of suspension explosions and poison just melting through everything. If you're bored of using the Osteostriga Necrotic Grip combo, an alternative option is pairing Verity's Brow with a Strand weapon, since the suspending explosion from Weaver's Trance actually happens to count as grenade damage, therefore it does a pretty hefty amount of damage, and this also helps you get your grenade back very quickly. However, because you're required to use a Strand weapon for this build to work, I personally think that it's not as strong, since Osteostriga is one of the best primary weapons in the game because of the sheer amount of damage that it can put out, and the ad clear potential with it is crazy. Just figured I'd mention that other build option for those of you that are interested, and I'll have a dim loadout link for both builds in the description. Moving on, our next aspect is Weaver's Call, which for this build doesn't really do anything special. The extra damage through threadlings is nice though. Since our whole goal with the build is to be able to kill enemies and suspend explode everything nearby, we need to have the Weaver's Trance buff active 100% of the time, so reducing the cooldown on our grenade is very important. Luckily, one fragment gives us our entire grenade back in just seconds, so even if you have really low discipline, it shouldn't be a problem at all, because the fragment thread of generation gives us a crazy amount of grenade energy back simply by just dealing damage. The fragment is a little bit complicated. I'm not going to go into huge depth with this. The main thing that you need to know is just the best way to take advantage of this is simply just dealing damage with fast firing weapons, hitting enemies very frequently, rather than slow firing ones. Luckily, since we're using Osteostriga anyways, we'll be fully benefiting from this, allowing ourselves to get our grenade back incredibly quickly just by dealing damage with our gun and using this fragment. For the rest of our fragments, we have Thread of Continuity to increase the duration of our suspend from 8 seconds to a total of 12 seconds, and it also interacts pretty nicely with Unravel since our melee will be applying Unravel anyways. Next, we have Thread of Warding, giving us Woven Mail anytime we pick up an Orb of Power, giving us a 60% damage reduction pretty much at all times, which is incredibly powerful. Lastly, we have Thread of Mind, giving us roughly 20% of our Rift back every time we defeat a suspended target, so pretty much we'll have infinite healing or empowering rifts with the build since we're constantly killing suspended targets, and our rift also has some pretty nice interactions with our mods. If you want additional survivability, I would recommend swapping out Thread of Continuity for Thread of Isolation, which applies a severing explosion when you hit precision hits on targets, reducing their damage done by a whopping 33%. Thread of Wisdom is also a fantastic option for additional Orb of Power generation, which I think is highly underrated with the build. The biggest downside with this build is simply its lack of healing. While we can use our healing rift rather frequently, it does require us to remain stationary. However, with access to volatile rounds in this season's artifact, we can take advantage of a Repulsor Brace weapon, with the perfect option being the new Waveframe GL Harsh Language. Repulsor Brace, if you didn't know, gives you a massive 45 HP overshield anytime you kill enemies that are affected by a Void debuff, namely Volatile, and you also take 50% less damage while that overshield is active. I know this is rather specific, but it pairs unbelievably well with the build because you can just whip out the GL for massive damage and AoE, and anytime you're about to die, you can just quickly get a kill and pretty much save yourself. The Void Overshield is incredibly powerful, and it's just very nice having a special weapon that you can just pop out and do a bunch of damage with. So I'd highly recommend trying to farm this weapon out on Neomuna if possible, but another fantastic option is really just any special weapon that happens to have Unrelenting on it. As for your heavy weapon, honestly, feel free to use whatever you want. When it comes to the stats, you want to prioritize getting 100 resilience first for that damage reduction, and then get as much discipline as humanly possible. Getting 100 discipline isn't entirely mandatory with the build because Thread of Generation will give us so much of our grenade back anyways, and we get a lot of grenade regeneration back with our mods. Speaking of mods, feel free to just copy paste this. I'll also have a dim loadout link in the description, but I just want to go piece by piece and just mention every individual mod and exactly what we're benefiting from with it. So for our helmet, I went for Void Siphon and Kinetic Siphon. Because I'm going to be using Harsh Language, I wanted to spawn more Orbs of Power whenever I use that, and Kinetic Siphon is pretty much mandatory since we're getting kills, namely with our Osteostriga. Then I have Ashes to Assets. This really isn't going to do that much with the build. You could very easily just put on Heavy Ammo Finder or Heavy Ammo Scout for your teammates. I just put it on because the suspension detonation from our kills with Weaver's Trance active, if you get a kill with just the damage that the suspension detonation does, it actually counts as a grenade kill, which is also the same reason that I have Firepower on, but it's simply just because I don't really have anything that much better to put on the gloves. So every once in a while I may create an extra Orb of Power with this if I get lucky, but you could also just swap this to Heavy-Handed, or if you have low discipline, you could swap that to Font of Focus. Next I have 1 Impact Induction, which just gives me 20% of my grenade back anytime we cause damage with our melee attack, which is pretty nice for extra regen there. And then I have Kinetic Loader, which I'd highly recommend because Osteostriga's reload time is a little slow, so this definitely helps out with that. For the chest, you just want some damage reduction, and then I put on Font of Endurance to give me an additional 30 resilience anytime we have an armor charge up, which with the build we should be armor charged 24/7. Because we're going to be taking advantage of weapon surges, we want to be able to pick up orbs as frequently as possible, which will be spawning through our helmet with Kinetic Siphon, and through our class item with Reaper, which we'll talk about in a second. You definitely want at least 2 kinetic weapon surges, giving you a total of 17% extra damage. And then for the third slot, you want Recuperation, giving you a pretty hefty heal every time you pick up an Orb of Power, which is very good since the build definitely lacks survivability. And for the class item, you want Reaper, so anytime you pop your Rift, your next weapon Final Blow will spawn an Orb of Power. This is pretty good because our build definitely lacks orb generation, so being able to have an on-demand way to spawn an orb is very powerful. Then I just went for 1 time dilation, so I have higher uptime on kinetic weapon surges if I happen to not be able to pick up orbs for a little bit. And then for the third, I actually went for Font of Restoration to give me an additional 30 recovery. However, if you have low discipline or you just want more grenade cooldown reduction, you could go for Bomber, giving you 12% of your grenade back anytime you pop your Rift down. Personally, I don't entirely think this is necessary because just with Threat of Generation and having 100 discipline plus Impact Induction, we will get our grenade back crazy fast anyways, and it is almost impossible to not have 100% uptime on Weaver's Trance with all of these things anyways. Real quick, I'll show my artifact mods and then I'll go into the tips on how you want to play with the build. Just definitely make sure to get authorized mods, voids, and grenade for your void siphon and your grenade mods. Shatter Orbs is very strong. Volatile Flow, if you plan on using a harsh language or something. Bricks from Beyond paired with that is very nice. And Prismatic Transfer is nice for that extra weapon damage as well. Keep in mind, if you happen to be using the other build with Verity's Brow, you want to be using Threaded Blast paired with Allied Unraveling and Untangler. Alright, here I'm just going to give you guys a quick demonstration to give you some tips on how you want to play with the build and exactly what sequences of abilities you want to be using. It's pretty simple. The main thing is that you just want to immediately open by activating your grenade for the Weaver's Trance buff, and then immediately popping down a Rift. It might seem counterintuitive, but you want the Rift down so that you can benefit from Reaper and immediately get an Orb of Power, to then start proccing your weapon surges, your fonts, etc. So I'm going to consume my grenade here, pop down a Rift, and then I'm immediately just going to kill this guy with my Osteostriga. He's going to spawn an Orb, and the first thing that I want to do is just immediately get to this Orb. Now that I have this Orb, I can just do whatever I want, start going on a killing rampage with my Osteostriga, making sure to pick up any orbs that I happen to spawn through Void Siphon or Kinetic Siphon. And then every 25 seconds, I just want to reactivate my grenade to re-give myself the Weaver's Trance buff. And then if there's a guy that, if I happen to get like low HP or something, I can swap my special weapon out, kill them to proc my Repulsor Brace. And then if you happen to see a higher health target, you want to put down your Rift again. Then you want to use your melee to unravel them, which will make them take extra damage. So this guy's taking a whole bunch of extra damage through that unravel that he has applied to him. And then that's pretty much it with the build. Make sure to just pick up all the orbs that you get. Here, I'll get myself low so you guys can see the heal through Repulsor Brace. So let's say, oh my god, I'm so scared. I'm getting low, blah blah blah. Can these guys do some damage? Alright, so then I would just get a kill and boom, I full healed because of Repulsor Brace. That's very nice. Reactivate my Weaver's Trance here. Kill some dudes. And that's pretty much it. The build is very, very simple. Activate your Rift if you just want to heal or do some extra damage, depending on which type of Rift you're using. And also make sure to pick up every orb that you're spawning. The orb picking up can be a little bit annoying with this build, and that's probably the biggest downside, is that you don't have a lot of orbs spawning, but if you're with other people that are spawning a lot of orbs, it should be perfectly fine. Other than that, just make sure to use your grenade every 25 seconds. Definitely make sure to pay attention to that buff. But otherwise, the build is very, very simple. That's pretty much it for the video though. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please be sure to drop a like and subscribe for more build videos in the future.